One of these bells was said to save lives, another to summon death. Can you tell which is which? Watch to find out. And if you want more hidden truths from inside the convent, this video is for you. Chapter 3, Prayer, Study, and Forbidden Texts. The afternoon sun slants through the scriptorium windows, transforming dust motes into dancing sparks of gold that settle on manuscripts like blessings made visible. You sit at your copying desk, quill poised above parchment that cost more than a farmer's yearly wages, preparing to transcribe words that have traveled through centuries to reach your careful hand. The silence here is different from the chapel's silence, thick with concentration rather than worship, pregnant with the weight of knowledge being preserved letter by letter. Sister Catherine sits 3 places to your left, her fingers permanently stained with ink that has become part of her flesh, marking her as surely as stigmata mark saints. She moves her quill across the page with movements so practiced they seem effortless, creating letters of such perfect uniformity that even trained scribes mistake her work for printing. Her manuscript today is a medical treatise by Avicenna, translated from Arabic into Latin by scholars who risked their lives to preserve Islamic learning during times when such knowledge was considered dangerous. The book you are copying contains botanical illustrations that challenge your artistic skills as much as your scribal precision. Each drawing must capture not only the plant's appearance, but also subtle details that help physicians identify healing herbs in the wild. A mistake in these illustrations could lead to misidentification, potentially causing death instead of healing. The responsibility weighs on your shoulders like a physical burden, reminding you that seemingly simple copying work carries consequences that extend far beyond these walls. The parchment beneath your quill breathes with the memory of the animal whose skin provided this writing surface. The finest parchment comes from young cows, their skin processed through treatments that remove hair and flesh while preserving the smooth surface required for detailed work. Each sheet represents not only the animal's sacrifice, but also the labor of craftsmen who understood the alchemy of transforming death into the foundation for preserved knowledge. Mother Superior enters the scriptorium with steps so soft they barely disturb the concentrated silence. Her presence shifts the room's energy subtly. 40 years of authority, creating an atmosphere of gentle discipline that encourages excellence without inspiring fear. She pauses beside your desk, observing the botanical illustration taking shape under your careful hand. Her approval expressed through the slight nod that means more than elaborate praise. The morning glory, she murmurs, identifying the flower you are copying. used by the ancients to induce visions, though we employ it now only for its purgative properties. Her words carry layers of meaning, acknowledging knowledge that exists while marking boundaries around its application. The convent walks carefully between preserving learning and avoiding practices that church authorities might consider heretical. She moves to a locked chest that sits beside the window, withdrawing a key that never leaves her person. Inside this chest rest the texts that cannot be displayed openly, works that contain knowledge too dangerous or controversial for casual access. Aristotle's complete writings, including those banned by recent church councils, treatises on natural magic that blur the line between science and sorcery, medical texts that describe procedures the church considers violations of divine will. Today she withdraws a manuscript bound in black leather, its covers unmarked by any title that might reveal its contents to casual observers. The book contains Ptolemy's astronomical writings, including calculations that place Earth at the center of the universe, while describing movements of planets that suggest more complex relationships than official doctrine acknowledges. Such texts exist in dangerous territory between accepted knowledge and forbidden speculation. Sister Margaret approaches the locked chest with the reverence due to a sacred reliquary, her hands trembling slightly as she receives the dangerous book. At 51 years, she has copied texts that cost other scholars their lives, preserving knowledge while carefully avoiding the attention of inquisitors who see heresy in mathematical calculations that challenge established cosmology. The astronomical calculations in these texts require mathematical knowledge that few possess, understanding of geometry and arithmetic that goes far beyond the simple accounting needed for monastery business. Sister Margaret has trained herself in these disciplines through years of patient study, learning from manuscripts that preserve Greek mathematical knowledge through Arabic translations that kept classical learning alive during centuries when European scholars lost access to original sources. You watch her open the astronomical text, revealing pages covered with diagrams that map celestial movements with precision that rivals observations made with instruments the convent could never afford. These charts show planetary positions calculated through methods that require understanding of complex mathematical relationships between time, position, and celestial mechanics. The instruments needed to verify these calculations exist in only the most advanced centers of learning, crafted by specialists who guard their techniques jealously. Astrolabes, capable of measuring star positions, are armillary spheres that model celestial movements, quadrants that calculate angles with precision necessary for accurate navigation. The convent possesses crude versions of some instruments, made by Sister Anne using measurements recorded in manuscripts rather than original examples. Working with astronomical texts requires not only mathematical skill, but also theological sophistication necessary to navigate the dangerous territory between scientific observation and religious doctrine. The Church teaches that God created the heavens for human benefit, that celestial movements serve divine purposes, rather than following natural laws that operate independently of supernatural intervention. Sister Margaret has learned to discuss astronomical knowledge in terms that acknowledge divine authority while preserving mathematical accuracy. Speaking of planetary movements as expressions of gods will, rather than mechanical processes governed by discoverable principles. This careful language allows scholarship to continue while avoiding charges of heresy that have destroyed other centers of learning. The copying of astronomical texts requires artistic skills that match scientific precision, creating diagrams that communicate complex three-dimensional relationships through two-dimensional illustrations. Each circle must be drawn with mathematical accuracy, angles measured precisely, proportions calculated to maintain clarity while fitting available parchment space. You observe Sister Margaret using a compass and straightedge to create geometric constructions that underlie astronomical diagrams. Her movements careful and deliberate as she translates numerical relationships into visual form. The tools themselves are marvels of medieval craftsmanship, made by specialists who understand that precision in measurement requires precision in toolmaking. The afternoon light shifts as clouds move across the sun, changing illumination in ways that affect the copying work. Sister Catherine pauses in her transcription, waiting for stable light to return before continuing with detailed botanical illustrations that require consistent lighting to maintain accuracy. The scriptorium's windows face north to minimize variations in natural light, but even carefully planned lighting cannot eliminate all fluctuations. The management of light in the scriptorium represents sophisticated understanding of how illumination affects detailed work. Windows are sized to provide adequate brightness without creating glare that strains eyes during long hours of concentration. Oil lamps supplement natural light during cloudy days and winter months, when daylight hours shrink to brief intervals between darkness. The oil used in these lamps comes from olives grown in southern regions, where climate permits cultivation of trees that provide fuel for illumination. The trade networks that supply lamp oil connect the convent to Mediterranean regions where different religious traditions preserve their own versions of classical knowledge, creating complex webs of cultural exchange that transcend political and religious boundaries. Sister Joan approaches your desk, carrying a manuscript that contains Hebrew text, letters that flow from right to left in patterns that reverse normal reading habits. She has spent years learning to read Hebrew through careful study of grammar texts and biblical commentaries that preserve Jewish scholarly traditions alongside Christian interpretations. The Hebrew manuscripts in the convent's collection include not only biblical texts, but also commentaries by Jewish scholars whose insights illuminate scriptural passages in ways that Latin translations cannot convey. These texts exist in complicated relationship with Christian doctrine, containing wisdom that enriches understanding while expressing perspectives that sometimes challenge orthodox interpretations. The preservation of Hebrew learning requires delicate navigation of religious sensitivities that view Jewish scholarship with suspicion while recognizing its value for understanding biblical texts. Sister Joan has learned to extract useful knowledge while avoiding interpretations that might be considered threatening to Christian faith. Walking carefully between intellectual curiosity and religious orthodoxy, the Hebrew alphabet itself presents copying challenges that differ from Latin script. Letters that connect in ways that affect meaning, vowel markings that must be placed with precision to preserve pronunciation and interpretation. Errors in Hebrew copying can completely alter textual meaning, requiring copyists to understand linguistic principles that go beyond simple letter recognition. Working with Hebrew texts also requires knowledge of Jewish calendar systems and numerical notation that use letters to represent numbers according to principles that differ from Arabic numerals, now becoming common in European manuscripts. The mathematical relationships embedded in Hebrew texts often carry mystical significance that adds layers of meaning to seemingly simple statements. As afternoon progresses toward evening, the scriptorium's work shifts from copying to study. Sisters gathering around texts to discuss questions that arise during transcription. These discussions blend scholarly inquiry with theological reflection, examining how preserved knowledge relates to contemporary understanding while identifying areas where further research might prove valuable. Sister Catherine raises a question about botanical illustrations she has been copying, pointing to details that seem inconsistent with plants growing in the convent garden. The discussion that follows demonstrates how manuscript preservation requires not only copying skills, but also knowledge of subject matter sufficient to identify potential errors and resolve apparent contradiction. The medical manuscripts contain descriptions of plants that grow in distant climates, healing herbs that must be imported at great expense are substituted with local alternatives that provide similar therapeutic effects. Understanding these substitutions requires botanical knowledge that connects abstract descriptions with concrete experience, theoretical learning with practical application. The conversation reveals the depth of knowledge these sisters have accumulated through years of careful study. Their familiarity with texts that span centuries and cultures, their ability to synthesize information from multiple sources to resolve specific questions. The scriptorium serves not only as copying center, but also as research institution that preserves and extends human learning. Mother Superior joins the discussion, contributing insights drawn from her extensive reading in theological texts that address the relationship between natural knowledge and religious faith. Her contributions demonstrate how medieval scholars integrated scientific observation with spiritual understanding, seeing both as paths toward comprehending divine creation. The theological framework within which the sisters pursue learning emphasizes that all knowledge ultimately serves religious purposes, that understanding natural world reveals God's glory while providing tools for serving human needs. This perspective allows them to study subjects that might otherwise be considered inappropriate for religious communities, framing scientific inquiry as form of worship rather than secular activity. The approach to forbidden texts reflects this theological understanding, treating dangerous knowledge as material that requires careful handling rather than complete avoidance. The sisters believe that wisdom lies not in ignorance, but in understanding how to apply knowledge appropriately, recognizing that the same learning that can lead to heresy can also deepen faith when properly understood. The locked chest contains works by authors whose names cannot be spoken in certain contexts, scholars whose ideas have been condemned by church councils, while their insights continue to influence scholarly discourse. Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle, Maimonides' philosophical works, treatises on natural magic that explore the boundaries between science and sorcery. These texts exist in carefully maintained copies that preserve controversial ideas while indicating the theological objections that led to their condemnation. Marginal notes added by previous readers create dialogues between authors and critics that help contemporary readers understand why certain ideas are considered dangerous while recognizing their intellectual value. The process of reading forbidden texts requires sophisticated hermeneutical skills that allow scholars to extract useful knowledge while avoiding doctrinal errors. Sister Margaret has developed techniques for reading philosophical works that separate valid logical methods from questionable metaphysical conclusions. Preserving Aristotelian logic while rejecting interpretations that conflict with Christian doctrine. The mathematical texts present different challenges, containing knowledge that appears religiously neutral, while carrying implications that challenge traditional cosmology. Geometric principles that apply to both earthly and celestial measurements. Astronomical calculations that reveal discrepancies between observed phenomena and accepted theories. Mathematical methods that suggest natural processes operate according to discoverable laws. Working with these mathematical concepts requires careful attention to language used in discussing scientific conclusions, phrasing observations in ways that acknowledge divine causation while preserving empirical accuracy. The sisters have learned to speak of natural regularities as expressions of God's consistency rather than independent natural laws that might diminish divine sovereignty. The afternoon study session continues as shadows lengthen across the scriptorium floor. Sisters bent over texts that challenge their intellectual abilities while nourishing their spiritual lives. The integration of scholarly work with religious practice reflects the medieval conviction that all truth ultimately serves divine purposes. That knowledge, pursued with proper intentions, becomes form of prayer rather than secular activity. The manuscripts they study connect the convent to scholarly networks that span the known world, linking their isolated community to centers of learning in distant cities, where similar communities of scholars preserve and extend human knowledge. Through careful copying and thoughtful study, these sisters participate in intellectual conversations that transcend geographical and cultural boundaries. As evening approaches, the natural light fades to levels that make detailed copying work impossible. But discussion continues by lamplight as sisters share insights gained through the day's study. These conversations blend scholarly analysis with personal reflection, examining how preserved learning applies to contemporary questions while identifying areas where further investigation might prove fruitful. The books are carefully closed and returned to their proper places, valuable manuscripts protected against damage while remaining accessible for future study. The locked chest receives its dangerous texts, controversial knowledge secured behind barriers that protect both the books and their readers from unwanted attention by authorities who view certain types of learning with suspicion. The scriptorium settles into evening quiet as sisters prepare for vespers. Their afternoon of intellectual labor, concluding with preparation for evening prayer that will integrate the day's learning with spiritual reflection. The transition from study to worship reflects the seamless connection between intellectual and spiritual life that characterizes medieval monasticism at its best. You gather your copying materials, cleaning quill points, and sealing ink containers according to procedures that preserve expensive supplies while ensuring availability for tomorrow's work. The botanical illustrations you created today will serve physicians for decades to come. Your careful artistry helping healers identify plants that save lives and ease suffering throughout the known world. If you enjoyed this story and want to join me for more nights of history and mystery, subscribe now, tap the bell icon, and let's journey back in time together. Chapter 4, Trials and Hardships Beyond the Obvious. The winter wind finds every gap in the ancient stone walls, seeping through mortar that has weathered 4 centuries of seasons, carrying with it the bitter promise of hardships that test flesh and spirit alike. You wake in your cell to darkness so complete it seems solid, a weight pressing against your eyes that speaks of snow falling beyond windows too small to admit meaningful light, even at midday. The cold strikes through wool blankets that have grown thin with washing, through the straw mattress that provides little insulation from flagstone floors that radiate chill like malevolent altars. Your breath creates clouds in the frigid air, vapor that dissipates quickly in the draft that never ceases its subtle assault on comfort. The water in your washing basin wears a skin of ice, thin membrane that cracks at the touch of fingers already numb with cold. This is the season that sorts the truly committed from those who entered religious life seeking comfort rather than spiritual transformation. Months when daily survival becomes an act of faith as demanding as any mystical experience. The bell that calls you to matins sounds different in winter air, its bronze voice made sharp and brittle by temperatures that contract metal and make each toll ring with crystalline clarity that cuts through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through silk. Even the bell suffers in this cold, Sister Beatrice has told you, the bronze contracting enough to alter its pitch slightly, creating harmonics that exist only during the hardest months of the year. You dress in darkness, pulling wool habit over linen undergarments that provide minimal warmth against the advancing cold. The fabric feels stiff, reluctant to bend around limbs that move slowly in the frigid air. Your fingers struggle with familiar knots and clasps, dexterity diminished by cold that makes simple tasks feel like complex challenges requiring conscious thought and deliberate effort. The corridor outside your cell breathes with currents of air that seem to seek out exposed skin, finding gaps between fabric and flesh with predatory precision. The oil lamps flicker more dramatically in winter drafts, their flames dancing in ways that create shifting shadows on walls where frost forms delicate patterns that disappear with dawn's warmth, only to return with each night's descent into bitter darkness. Other sisters move through the gloom like ghosts wrapped in dark cloth, their faces pale with cold and drawn with the particular exhaustion that comes from never being truly warm, never achieving the complete rest that requires comfortable surrender to sleep's embrace. You recognize in their movements the careful economy of motion that conserves warmth, the unconscious huddling that draws arms close to bodies seeking to preserve vital heat. Sister Marguerite, now 74 and entering her 6th decade of religious life, moves with special care across flagstones made treacherous by frost that forms where drafts carry moisture through the stone maze of corridors. Her joints swollen with rheumatism that responds to barometric pressure like a living barometer. Predict weather changes with accuracy that surpasses any instrument available to medieval science. The chapel offers little relief from cold that seems to inhabit the very stones, radiating from walls and floor with persistent chill that no amount of candles can fully dispel. The massive stones that provide summer coolness become winter's cruelest torment. Thermal mass that absorbs heat from human bodies while offering nothing in return but architectural permanence that outlasts the brief warmth of mortal flesh. You take your place in the choir stall, wood so cold it burns exposed skin that touches it directly. The prayer book pages feel brittle, parchment made fragile by moisture, stealing cold that threatens to crack delicate illuminations painted by artists whose hands never knew such bitter working conditions. Your voice joins the others in song that rises in visible clouds, breath made manifest in air so cold that even exhalation becomes visible proof of life, persisting in conditions that challenge survival itself. The prayers seem to take longer in winter cold, familiar words requiring more conscious effort to pronounce clearly through lips that resist movement, tongues that feel thick and clumsy in mouths, dried by breathing frigid air that steals moisture with each inhalation. The Latin flows less smoothly when formed by voices struggling against physiological responses to cold that makes speech itself an act of determination. Sister Agnes, who has served as cantor for 23 years, modifies her vocal technique to accommodate winter's effects on breathing and voice production. The cold air requires deeper breathing to provide adequate oxygen, while simultaneously making deep breathing painful as frigid atmosphere shocks lung tissue accustomed to warmer conditions. Her voice shows the strain, clear tones slightly roughened by the effort of maintaining pitch accuracy when cold affects the very mechanism of vocal production. The morning office concludes with prayers that seem to echo longer in winter air. Sound waves traveling differently through atmosphere dense with cold and moisture. You file from the chapel with movements made deliberate by cold that turn simple walking into conscious navigation of treacherous surfaces where frost creates patches of slippery uncertainty on familiar paths. The refectory offers the day's first real warmth, heat radiating from kitchen, ovens that burn continuously during winter months, fed with wood cut during autumn's preparation for seasonal hardship. The great fireplace at the hall's far end consumes massive oak logs, flame and coal providing heat that reaches perhaps 10 feet from the hearth before dissipating into the larger cold that dominates interior spaces designed for different purposes than thermal comfort. The breakfast bread comes warm from ovens that Sister Catherine tends, with understanding born from necessity. Timing that ensures hot food reaches tables, while still carrying heat that warms bodies from within. The porridge steams in wooden bowls, oats cooked with precious milk and honey that provide calories necessary for maintaining body heat during hours of cold that lie ahead. You eat quickly, knowing that food cools rapidly in air that steals heat from anything warmer than itself, transforming hot porridge into lukewarm sustenance and lukewarm sustenance into cold paste that provides nutrition without comfort. The sisters maintain silence during meals, but you can hear in the scrape of spoons against bowls and the careful sipping of hot beverages the shared understanding of those who face hardship together. The day's work begins with tasks made difficult by cold that affects everything from manual dexterity to tool performance. In the scriptorium, ink thickens in winter air, requiring heating near candle flames to restore fluidity necessary for smooth writing. Parchment becomes brittle, threatening to crack if bent too sharply or handled roughly. Quill pens require more frequent trimming as cold makes them prone to breaking when pressed against resistant writing surfaces. Sister Catherine works with hands wrapped in fingerless gloves that preserve dexterity while providing minimal warmth to digits that must maintain sufficient flexibility for detailed illustration work. The botanical drawings she creates during winter months show subtle differences from summer work, lines that reflect the tremor of hands fighting cold, colors mixed with fingers less sensitive to subtle variations in hue and consistency. The heating of the scriptorium depends on braziers filled with charcoal that produces heat without smoke that would damage valuable manuscripts. These braziers provide circles of warmth, perhaps 3 feet in diameter, creating zones of relative comfort that shift throughout the day as sisters move the heating sources to accommodate different workstations. The charcoal itself represents precious fuel, conserved carefully through measured burning that provides maximum heat while preserving supplies that must last through months. when forests stand locked in ice that makes wood cutting impossible. You learn to work within these circles of warmth, positioning yourself and your materials to benefit from heat, while avoiding the drafts that seem to seek out every position where comfort might be achieved. The copying work requires frequent breaks to warm hands that lose feeling despite the brazier's heat, fingers that must be flexed and massaged back to sensitivity before returning to precise movements that detailed manuscript work demands. The medical preparations in Sister Magdalene's infirmary become more complex during winter months, when cold affects both the medicines themselves and the conditions they must treat. Tinctures thicken, requiring gentle warming to restore proper consistency. Salves become hard as stone, needing careful heating that restores spreadability without destroying active principles that provide healing properties. The patients who seek treatment during winter present conditions, rarely seen in warmer seasons, ailments that result directly from cold's assault on human physiology. Chilblains affect hands and feet exposed to temperature extremes, creating painful swelling that responds to warming treatments that must be applied gradually to avoid tissue damage. Joint pain increases dramatically, rheumatism flaring in response to barometric pressure changes that accompany winter weather systems. Sister Magdalene has developed winter-specific treatments that address cold-related conditions while compensating for seasonal changes in medicine effectiveness. Warming herbs like ginger and cayenne become more important. Their heat-producing properties providing internal warmth that supplements external heating methods. Oil-based preparations resist freezing better than water-based medicines, maintaining effectiveness when stored in unheated spaces. The garden work continues even in winter's grip, though tasks shift to preservation and maintenance activities that prepare for spring's eventual return. Root vegetables stored in sand-filled barrels must be checked regularly for signs of spoilage that would contaminate entire supplies. Dried herbs require inspection for moisture accumulation that could lead to mold growth in storage containers affected by temperature fluctuations. Sister Rose tends winter garden tasks with understanding gained through decades of seasonal cycles. Knowledge of how different preservation methods perform under extreme conditions. She knows which stored foods will fail first when cold storage areas experience temperature fluctuations. Which preservation techniques provide reliable nutrition throughout winter months when fresh food becomes unavailable. The greenhouses, constructed of oiled cloth stretched over wooden frames, provide protected spaces where some fresh growth continues through winter months. These structures require daily attention, covers adjusted to capture maximum sunlight while protecting plants from killing frosts that form, even in protected spaces during the coldest nights. The balance between protection and light exposure requires constant monitoring. Decisions made daily based on weather conditions and plant responses that indicate optimal growing conditions. The preserved foods that sustain the community through winter demonstrate medieval food preservation techniques refined through centuries of seasonal survival. Salted meats maintain nutritional value while resisting spoilage in storage areas where temperature fluctuations would destroy other preservation methods. Fermented vegetables provide vitamins necessary for preventing scurvy during months when fresh produce becomes unavailable. The bread making continues despite winter's challenges, though cold affects every aspect of the process, from dough rising to oven heating. Sister Catherine adjusts her techniques for winter conditions, extending rising times to compensate for cold that slows yeast activity while maintaining oven temperatures that require more fuel during months when heat dissipates rapidly into frigid air. The water supply presents winter challenges that threaten community survival if not properly managed. The well, protected by a wooden cover that prevents ice formation, requires daily attention to maintain access to unfrozen water. Drawing water becomes laborious when rope stiffens with cold and bucket handles burn fingers that touch metal exposed to winter air. The laundry work becomes nearly impossible during the hardest winter months, washing water freezing almost immediately when exposed to outside air. Sister Joan has developed winter washing techniques that take advantage of brief periods when temperatures rise above freezing, concentrating laundry work into intensive sessions that clean as much as possible before cold returns with its paralyzing grip. The drying of washed clothing requires creativity during winter months when outside air would freeze wet fabric solid. Indoor drying near fireplaces and ovens extends the time required for laundry to dry completely while competing with other activities that require heat sources. The management of limited heating fuel becomes critical calculation, decisions about heat allocation affecting everything from food preparation to manuscript copying. The spiritual challenges of winter extend beyond physical discomfort to psychological struggles that test religious commitment in ways summer seasons cannot match. The shortened daylight hours affect mood and mental clarity, darkness pressing in from all sides until it seems to inhabit thoughts as well as external space. Prayer becomes more difficult when concentration suffers from cold, induced fatigue, and seasonal depression that accompanies reduced exposure to sunlight. The community gathers more frequently during winter months, shared warmth and companionship, providing psychological comfort that supplements inadequate heating. Evening conversations extend longer as sisters reluctant to return to cold cells find reasons to remain in communal spaces where fireplaces offer heat and human presence provides comfort against winter's isolation. Sister Catherine shares techniques for maintaining focus during copying work that becomes nearly impossible when cold makes holding writing instruments painful. She has learned to warm quills near candle flames without singeing delicate feathers, to mix inks that flow smoothly despite low temperatures, to position work surfaces where available heat provides maximum benefit while avoiding drafts that would make detailed work impossible. The fasting periods prescribed by religious calendar become more challenging during winter months when bodies require additional calories to maintain warmth necessary for survival. The sisters modify traditional fasting practices to accommodate seasonal needs, reducing food intake while ensuring adequate nutrition for maintaining health during periods when medical help lies days away through snow, blocked roads. The midnight office of vigils presents special hardships during winter months when chapel stones radiate cold that penetrates wool habits and chills bodies already depleted by daily struggles against temperature extremes. The sisters gather for these late night prayers, wrapped in additional blankets, moving carefully through corridors where ice forms from breath condensation on walls that never warm above freezing during the hardest months. Sister Beatrice's climb to the bell tower becomes treacherous during winter months when ice forms on stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. She moves carefully in pre-dawn darkness, carrying oil lamps that provide minimal light while threatening to extinguish in drafts that sweep through the tower with particular fury during winter storms. The bell ropes themselves become stiff with cold, requiring more force to produce clear tones from bronze that contracts in frigid air. The bell's voices change subtly during winter months, pitch rising slightly as metal contracts, while resonance alters in ways that affect how sound carries through cold air that transmits tones differently than summer atmosphere. Sister Beatrice compensates for these seasonal changes, adjusting her technique to maintain the precise timing that structures community life through seasons that make accurate timekeeping more important, as daylight provides less reliable schedule guidance. The construction of the convent buildings, designed primarily for summer cooling in a climate where winter extremes were less predictable, provides inadequate protection against cold that tests the limits of medieval heating technology. The thick stone walls that moderate summer heat become thermal sinks that absorb warmth from interior spaces while offering little insulation against exterior cold that penetrates through mortar joints and window openings designed for ventilation rather than heat retention. Full warmth than heat retention. The heating systems available to medieval communities depend primarily on wood fires that provide radiant heat in limited areas while consuming fuel that must be gathered during brief periods when weather permits forest access. The massive fireplaces that heat community spaces draw their fuel from oak logs that represent hours of dangerous work cutting and hauling wood through forests, where winter storms create hazards from falling branches, covered ice, covered paths. The management of wood fuel requires careful planning that begins in autumn months, when weather still permits safe access to forest areas where deadfall and selected living trees provide winter heating fuel. Sister Anne organizes wood-cutting expeditions that must gather sufficient fuel for heating, cooking, and specialized purposes like metalworking that cannot cease entirely during winter months when tool maintenance becomes critical for community survival. The storage of cut wood requires understanding of seasoning processes that remove moisture while preserving maximum heating value. Techniques that balance immediate needs with long-term fuel conservation. Green wood burns poorly while producing excessive smoke that makes interior fires nearly impossible to maintain. Properly seasoned wood burns cleanly with maximum heat production, but seasoning requires time and storage space that must be planned months in advance. The allocation of heating fuel among competing needs requires decisions that affect every aspect of community life. Choices between warming community spaces and maintaining workshop temperatures necessary for essential crafts. The scriptorium receives priority for heating because manuscript preservation requires protection from moisture fluctuations that could damage centuries of accumulated knowledge. But this priority comes at cost to personal comfort in residential areas. The kitchen maintains continuous fires during winter months. Ovens and cooking fires providing heat that makes food preparation possible while creating the only consistently warm space in the entire complex. The sisters gather in the kitchen during free periods, finding excuses for food preparation tasks that allow them to absorb heat while contributing to community welfare through productive labor. Sister Catherine has learned to use oven heat for multiple purposes beyond food preparation, warming water for washing, heating medicines that require specific temperatures, drying herbs and other materials that would spoil in unheated storage areas. The thermal efficiency of medieval ovens, designed to retain heat for hours after fires die down, allows careful scheduling that maximizes heating value from limited fuel supplies. The medical challenges of winter extend beyond cold, related conditions to problems caused by reduced nutrition and limited fresh food that affects community health in subtle but significant ways. Scurvy threatens communities that lack access to fresh vegetables, symptoms appearing gradually as stored foods fail to provide vitamins necessary for maintaining health during months when fresh produce becomes unavailable. Sister Magdalene has developed winter health maintenance protocols that prevent nutritional deficiencies while treating conditions that become more severe in cold conditions. Her medicine stocks include dried fruits and preserved vegetables that provide vitamins missing from grain-based winter diets, preparations that maintain health while supplies last through months when transportation becomes impossible. The psychological effects of winter isolation compound physical hardships, depression and irritability increasing as communities remain closed within themselves for months without outside contact. The sisters develop coping strategies that maintain morale through shared activities, storytelling sessions, and craft work that provides creative outlets during periods when outdoor activities become impossible. The maintenance of religious observances becomes more challenging when cold makes long services physically demanding, when shortened daylight hours compress the traditional schedule of prayers and work into periods when natural light provides adequate illumination. The sisters adjust prayer schedules to accommodate winter conditions while maintaining the essential rhythm of religious observance that structures community life throughout seasonal changes. The snow that accumulates around convent buildings creates insulation that actually improves heating efficiency while blocking access routes that connect the community to outside world. Deep snow provides protection from wind while creating barriers that make travel impossible until spring thaws restore access to roads and paths that connect isolated communities to larger centers of population and trade. The winter storms that sweep across the region bring winds that test building construction, driving snow through gaps that remain invisible during calmer weather, while creating drifts that block doorways and windows until manual removal restores access. The sisters organize storm response teams that clear essential pathways while maintaining access to critical facilities like the well, kitchen, and chapel that must remain functional regardless of weather conditions. The clothing worn during winter months represents medieval textile technology adapted to extreme conditions, layers of wool and linen that provide insulation while allowing freedom of movement necessary for daily tasks. The sisters wear additional undergarments during the coldest months. Linen shifts and wool, stockings that add warmth while maintaining the modest appearance required by religious regulations. The laundering of winter clothing becomes nearly impossible during months when water freezes almost immediately upon exposure to outside air. The sisters develop winter washing techniques that concentrate cleaning into brief periods when temperatures rise above freezing. Intensive laundry sessions that clean essential garments while conserving water and fuel necessary for heating washing solutions. The preservation of personal health during winter months requires attention to details that become critical when medical help lies beyond reach through snow, blocked roads. The sisters maintain winter health protocols that prevent common cold weather ailments while treating conditions that become dangerous when allowed to develop without proper attention. The shared sleeping arrangements adopted during the coldest months represent practical responses to heating limitations that make individual cell warming impossible with available fuel supplies. Sisters share beds and sleeping areas, body heat providing warmth that individual heating cannot achieve, while fostering community bonds that help maintain morale during months when isolation tests psychological resilience. The diet modifications necessary during winter months balance nutritional needs with food preservation limitations. Meals designed to provide calories necessary for maintaining body heat while conserving stored foods that must last through months when resupply becomes impossible. The sisters develop winter recipes that maximize nutrition from preserved ingredients while creating variety that prevents diet monotony from affecting morale. The craft work that continues during winter months adapts to cold conditions that affect material behavior and tool performance. Spinning and weaving continue in heated spaces. Textile work providing productive activity while creating clothing and household items necessary for community survival. The sisters gather for evening spinning sessions. Shared warmth and companionship making winter crafts social occasions that brighten dark months. The storytelling traditions that develop during winter evenings provide entertainment and education while preserving community memory through oral traditions that supplement written records. Sister Marguerite, with her 74 years of experience, shares stories of previous winters, teaching younger sisters survival techniques while maintaining connections to community history that spans generations. As winter reaches its deepest cold, you learn that survival requires not only physical endurance, but also spiritual resilience that finds meaning in suffering, that transforms hardship into opportunity for spiritual growth. The sisters understand that winter's challenges test faith in ways that comfortable seasons cannot match. That true religious commitment proves itself through perseverance during times when every aspect of daily life becomes a struggle against circumstances that threaten survival itself. The end of winter, when it finally comes, brings appreciation for simple comforts that temperate seasons make easy to take for granted. The first day, when ice fails to form overnight, the morning when breath no longer steams in the chapel air, the afternoon when sitting in sunlight provides genuine warmth rather than merely psychological comfort. These small victories over winter's dominance remind the sisters that hardship serves purposes beyond mere endurance. That struggle can deepen appreciation for blessings that abundance makes invisible. Chapter 5. Nightfall and rituals in the dark. The evening bell resonates through stone corridors with a voice different from its daytime siblings. Bronze tones that seem to carry the weight of approaching darkness, calling souls to gather before night claims dominion over earth and sky. You move through passages where shadows pool like dark water in corners that never receive direct light. Your footsteps joining the quiet procession of sisters who understand that nightfall brings not merely rest, but entrance into mystery, deeper than sleep, older than dreams. The chapel at Vespers breathes differently than in morning light. Air heavy with accumulated prayers and the particular silence that follows a day of spoken worship. Candles flicker along walls where daylight has retreated, flames that seem more alive now, dancing with energy that daylight diminishes but darkness awakens. The very stones appear to listen more intently as night falls, as if the building itself prepares for conversations between human souls and divine presence that daylight's busyness tends to obscure. You take your place in the choir stall worn smooth by centuries of evening prayers, wood that has absorbed the devotions of countless souls who gathered here when darkness made the outside world disappear, leaving only this space of candlelight and community where human voices reach toward heaven with special urgency that night seems to inspire. The evening office begins not with the brisk efficiency of morning prayer, but with the deeper breathing of those who prepare to release the day's concerns into divine hands. Sister Beatrice has lit the candles according to patterns passed down through generations of evening preparations, arrangements that provide practical illumination while creating symbolic geometries that speak to eyes trained to read meaning in the placement of flame and shadow. The altar candles burn in groups of 3 and 7, numbers that carry theological significance dating to biblical times, when light first pushed back primordial darkness at divine command. The 7 candles that mark the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit cast their glow across carved stone that seems to come alive in flickering light. Faces of saints emerging from shadow, only to retreat again as flame dances in drafts that move through the chapel like invisible congregants joining earthly worshipers in evening praise. The interplay of light and shadow transforms familiar space into something more mysterious, more receptive to the presence of the sacred that darkness seems to invoke. Mother Superior's voice rises in the ancient melodies that have called Christian communities to evening prayer since Desert Fathers first gathered to sing psalms beneath Egyptian stars. Her voice carries deeper resonance in nighttime acoustics. Stone walls reflecting sound differently in air that has cooled and settled into stillness unknown during daylight hours of activity and movement. The psalms flow through darkness like rivers of sound that connect this moment to all previous evenings when human voices have offered praise as day surrenders to night. The office of Vespers unfolds according to rhythms that mirror creation's own cycles, prayers that acknowledge both the blessing of completed work and the necessity of rest that comes with darkness. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord, rises from 40, three voices that blend into harmony more perfect than any choir trained for performance. Voices united not by musical technique, but by shared purpose that transcends individual ability to create something larger than its constituent parts. The antiphons weave through evening prayer like threads in tapestry, melodies that carry both words and wordless meaning, tunes that have traveled through centuries to reach contemporary voices while retaining power to move hearts toward contemplation deeper than rational thought can achieve. Sister Agnes leads the chant with understanding gained through decades of evening prayers. Her voice, shaped by years of singing these melodies until they have become part of her breath itself. The psalm tones used for evening prayer differ subtly from morning music. Modes selected for their power to encourage inward reflection rather than outward action. Melodies that draw consciousness toward stillness necessary for examining the day's spiritual progress. These musical choices reflect medieval understanding of how sound affects soul. Knowledge preserved in treatises that analyze the psychological and spiritual effects of different melodic patterns. The readings appointed for evening prayer focus on themes of rest and reflection, biblical passages that prepare hearts for night's journey through sleep toward tomorrow's resurrection of activity and light. Tonight's reading comes from the Song of Songs, mystical poetry that speaks of divine love in language that makes earthly metaphors vehicles for spiritual understanding that surpasses literal comprehension. Sister Catherine reads with voice trained through years of public speaking that must carry clearly through stone spaces designed to echo and amplify human sound. Her pronunciation of Latin follows patterns learned from teachers who preserved classical pronunciation through centuries when spoken Latin evolved into regional dialects that would have rendered ancient prayer to their original speakers. The reading unfolds in candlelight that makes ancient words seem present rather than historical. Verses that speak directly to contemporary hearts, despite their origin in cultures separated by millennia from current experience. By night on my bed, I sought him whom my soul loves. Resonates through the chapel with immediacy that transcends temporal distance. Poetry that makes divine love present reality rather than abstract concept. The response that follows involves the entire community in dialogue with Scripture. Voices joining in refrains that weave through biblical text like commentary made musical. My beloved is mine, and I am his. Rings through stone spaces with conviction that transforms individual prayers into corporate confession. 40. Three souls speaking as one voice, their commitment to divine relationship that gives meaning to monastic life. The Magnificat, Mary's song of praise from Luke's Gospel, rises as evening's climactic moment. Canticle that has concluded Christian evening prayer since the earliest centuries of church history. The familiar words carry special power in darkness. Verses that proclaim divine mercy while acknowledging human dependence on grace that comes not through personal achievement, but through divine gift freely given. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. Sister Margaret sings with voice made pure by years of prayer, words that seem to lift the chapel's roof and carry song directly toward heaven, where angels join earthly choirs in eternal praise. The other sisters join their voices to her, creating harmony that seems to make the very air vibrate with sacred presence, that darkness intensifies rather than diminishes. The evening concludes with prayer for protection through night's dangers, petitions that acknowledge human vulnerability while claiming divine care that watches over those who sleep in faith. These prayers recognize that night brings not only physical rest, but also spiritual challenges, dreams that can disturb peace, fears that grow stronger in darkness, temptations that attack souls weakened by days' accumulated struggles. The procession from chapel to dormitory follows routes marked by oil lamps that burn throughout the night, flames tended by sisters who take turns maintaining illumination that ensures safe passage through corridors where complete darkness would make movement dangerous on uneven stone floors worn smooth by centuries of use. These lamps burn oil pressed from olives grown in distant groves, each flame representing trade networks that connect isolated communities to larger world of commerce and culture. The dormitory itself reflects medieval understanding of communal living adapted to religious purposes, sleeping arrangements that balance privacy with community oversight, individual cells that provide solitude while maintaining connection to larger household that shares both blessings and burdens of monastic life. The cells line corridors designed to facilitate supervision while allowing personal space necessary for private prayer and rest. Your cell receives you like familiar embrace. Narrow space that has become more home than any house you knew before entering religious life. The stone walls that seemed cold and forbidding during early months now provide security. Boundaries that protect inner life from external distractions while creating sacred space where personal relationship with divine develops through hours of solitude that alternate with community activity. The bed, narrow mattress stuffed with straw and covered with woolen blankets woven in the convent workshop, offers comfort that luxury cannot match. Rest earned through days' labor that serves purposes higher than personal satisfaction. The pillow, filled with down from geese raised in the convent yard. Cradle's head that has worked through day's challenges while supporting mind that continues wrestling with questions that have no easy answers. The small window that provides your cell's only natural light now frames stars that appear with clarity impossible in populated areas where human lights compete with celestial illumination. The night sky visible from this window connects you to cosmic rhythms that medieval understanding recognized as expressions of divine order. Stellar movements that mark time's passage while reminding earthbound observers of their place in creation far larger than human comprehension can grasp. The particular stars visible from your window change with seasons. Different constellations rising and setting according to Earth's journey around sun that medieval astronomy understood through complex calculations preserved in manuscripts that few can read and fewer can comprehend. The movement of stars provides natural calendar more reliable than human timekeeping. Celestial clock that has marked agricultural seasons since humanity first learned to read meaning in night sky's pattern. Tonight, Venus shines above the western horizon. Planet named for Roman goddess of love, but understood by Christian astronomy as symbol of divine light that penetrates earthly darkness. The planet's brightness outshines nearby stars, celestial beacon that has guided navigators and inspired poets, while reminding observers that light exists beyond earthly sources. Illumination that comes from realms where different laws govern existence itself. The evening prayers continue in private as community prayer gives way to personal devotions that each sister pursues according to individual spiritual needs and the particular calling that brought her to monastic life. These private prayers often extend far into night hours, souls wrestling with questions that daytime activities push aside, hearts seeking reassurance that religious commitment continues to serve divine purposes rather than merely human convenience. Sister Margaret, in the cell adjacent to yours, prays audibly through much of each night, voice that carries through thin walls with words that seem addressed more to heaven than to earthly listeners. Her prayers include names of family members she has not seen for decades, friends whose faces she remembers though their voices have faded from memory, former students who learned Latin grammar and theological principles under her patient instruction during years when she served as novice mistress. The night office of vigils calls those who choose to participate to additional prayer that divides night's rest into periods of sleep and worship, following Desert Father's practice of maintaining continuous prayer that bridges day and night in unbroken conversation with divine presence. Not all sisters participate in these midnight prayers, but those who do gather in chapel at hour when darkness reaches deepest point, before dawn begins its slow return. You join tonight's vigil, rising from bed to dress again in habit that provides minimal warmth against chapel cold that intensifies during night hours when fires burn low and stone walls radiate accumulated chill into air that seems to crystallize around bodies seeking warmth through movement and shaking walls through movement and shared presence. The handful of sisters who gather for midnight prayer create community within community, smaller group united by commitment to worship that extends beyond minimum requirements. The chapel at midnight transforms into space more mysterious than evening vespers could achieve. Candlelight that seemed adequate for community prayer, now appearing fragile against darkness that presses close around small islands of illumination. The few candles lit for vigils create intimate atmosphere that makes whispered prayers seem to carry directly to divine ears without need for amplification or repetition. The psalms chosen for midnight prayer speak directly to themes appropriate for darkest hours, verses that acknowledge human frailty while claiming divine protection that watches over those who sleep in faith. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep, provides reassurance that divine attention continues through hours when human consciousness yields to rest that restores both body and spirit for tomorrow's challenges. The reading appointed for vigils comes from contemplative texts that require darkness for full appreciation, mystical writings that speak of soul's journey toward divine union through stages that parallel night's progression from evening twilight through midnight darkness toward dawn's promise of renewed light. Tonight's passage from Dionysius, the Areopagite, explores themes of divine darkness that surpasses human understanding, mystery that reveals itself through concealment rather than illumination. The silence that follows midnight readings extends longer than daytime pauses, stillness that allows words to penetrate consciousness more deeply than rapid-paced daily activities permit. In this silence, you can hear building itself breathing, stone and timber expanding and contracting with temperature changes that create subtle sounds like sighs from ancient lungs that have breathed through centuries of worship and rest. Sister Joan sits in profound stillness that seems to make her disappear into shadow. Meditation so deep that her presence becomes part of chapel's accumulated silence rather than interruption of its peace. Her practice of contemplative prayer extends through hours that most spend in sleep, soul journeying through interior landscapes that mystical tradition maps with precision unknown to earthly geography. The return from vigils to cell provides opportunity for sleep deeper than earlier rest, consciousness purified by midnight prayer that clears spiritual atmosphere in ways that make remaining sleep more restorative than hours unconscious of divine presence. The bed receives you again with comfort, enhanced by brief absence. Rest more precious for being reclaimed rather than merely continued. The dreams that come after midnight prayer carry different qualities from ordinary sleep experiences, images that seem connected to divine communication rather than mere processing of daily impressions. Medieval understanding recognizes dreams as potential vehicles for heavenly messages, sleep states that open consciousness to influences normally blocked by waking mind's focus on immediate concerns and practical necessities. Tonight your dreams carry you through landscapes that blend memory with vision, familiar faces appearing in contexts that never existed in waking experience, yet feel more real than actual encounters with sane people during ordinary consciousness. The dreams flow like water through channels carved by prayer, carrying meanings that rational analysis cannot decipher, yet leaving impressions that linger into morning awareness with sense of communication received rather than fantasy generated. Sister Catherine, who sleeps in cell across corridor, experiences dreams that often contain solutions to copying problems that puzzle her during waking hours. Manuscript questions that resolve themselves through sleep visions that show proper techniques or historical contexts necessary for accurate transcription. Her dreams participate in scholarly work that continues through unconscious processing of information gathered during conscious study. The bells that mark night hours ring differently than daytime signals. Bronze voices that seem muffled by darkness, yet carry further through still air that conducts sound with clarity impossible during day's bustle. and activity. These night bells serve different purposes from their daytime counterparts, marking time for those who wake naturally while avoiding disturbance of sleep that restores strength necessary for tomorrow's labor. The night watch maintained by rotating sisters ensures security while providing pastoral care for community members who experience difficulties that darkness often intensifies. Physical ailments that worsen during night hours, spiritual struggles that seem more overwhelming when faced alone in darkness. Tonight, Sister Magdalene maintains watch. Her presence in corridor providing reassurance while her medical knowledge stands ready to address emergencies that could threaten community welfare. The protection prayers spoken during night hours invoke divine guardianship over sleeping community. Petitions that claim biblical promises of angelic protection while acknowledging human vulnerability during unconscious hours when personal vigilance cannot prevent spiritual or physical attack. These prayers create spiritual atmosphere that medieval understanding recognizes as essential for peaceful rest in a world where evil forces operate with particular freedom during darkness. The morning will come, as it has for centuries, with bell voices that call souls to new day's opportunities for service and growth. But now darkness holds dominion, night that provides rest while offering glimpses of mysteries that daylight's busyness makes difficult to perceive. In this darkness, wrapped in silence broken only by prayer and gentle breathing of sisters who share commitment to divine service, you rest in peace that surpasses human understanding while participating in vigil that connects earth to heaven through hours when most of creation sleeps. Peck whispers in stone, a medieval convent chronicle. If you enjoyed this story and want to join me for more nights of history and mystery, subscribe now, tap the bell icon, and let's journey back in time together